Imagine you're house hunting with your in-laws, and the realtor they adore treats you like you don't exist. Then your mother-in-law says you were the rude one. What would you do? Stay polite or walk away? This happened to someone I know, and trust me, it gets worse. Imagine you're house hunting with your in-laws, and the realtor they adore treats you like you don't exist. Then your mother-in-law says you were the rude one. What would you do? Stay polite or walk away? This happened to someone I know, and trust me, it gets worse. The struck pillows the fur south. Let's rewind to the beginning of the day. She and her husband, both 29, married for a few years now, were finally ready to buy a home for their growing family. A big step. They brought along their kids, her in-laws, and their realtor, Bob. Now here's the thing. Bob wasn't just any realtor. He was her in-laws' trusted realtor, the one who'd helped them find their current home years ago. So, while her husband and she had never worked with Bob before, her in-laws clearly had a comfortable, almost friendly rapport with him. They were at the first house of the day, a quaint place, nothing fancy, but enough space for the kids, and maybe even a home office. Everyone rushed into the small mudroom to check it out, leaving her and Bob alone in the kitchen. She took the opportunity to casually ask a simple question: whether this was the house that had 2 bedrooms downstairs and 2 upstairs. It was a normal thing to ask. She wasn't being pushy, demanding, or out of line. But Bob's reaction? Cold, unexpected. He rolled his eyes, sighed loudly, and literally walked away without a word. No clarification, no answer, not even a polite brush-off. Just walked away. She was stunned, not just by the rudeness, but by how unnecessary and personal it felt. And here's the thing, this wasn't the first time he'd acted that way. She'd noticed a pattern in previous house viewings. The forced politeness, the way he avoided eye contact, and how he seemed to only direct his responses toward her husband, even if she was the one asking the question. Still, she brushed it off, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just having an off day. Maybe it wasn't personal. But then, the moment that really made it clear, they all went downstairs to see the basement. Her husband asked Bob the exact same question she'd asked in the kitchen. Bob lit up. Suddenly, he was talkative, detailed, encouraging. He explained everything with enthusiasm and addressed the whole group except her. Not once did he look her way. At that point, she'd had enough. Her kids were already getting restless, so she used that as a reason to step outside with them. But inside, she was angry. Not just at Bob, but at how invisible she felt. Like she wasn't part of the decision, even though she and her husband were the ones buying the home, not her in-laws, not Bob. And the moment she stepped away, her mother-in-law called her rude, as if being silent and invisible was more acceptable than standing up for herself. It didn't end there. What stung the most wasn't just Bob's behavior. It was how quickly her mother-in-law dismissed her feelings and instead defended him without hesitation. As soon as they were back outside, her mother-in-law approached her, tone sharp, face tight with disapproval. "It was rude of you to walk out while Bob was still talking," she said. Just like that. No questions, no, "Are you okay?" or "What happened?" Just a flat-out accusation. Still upset, but trying to stay respectful, she explained what had happened. She told Hermile exactly how Bob had rolled his eyes, how he'd ignored her completely, how he'd responded so differently to her husband. She expected at least a moment of understanding, or maybe even a little shock. Instead, her mother-in-law waved it off, again, saying Bob was just like that sometimes, and that he's a close family friend. That was the moment something clicked. It wasn't just about Bob. It was about who got to be included, who got the benefit of the doubt, and who didn't. Her feelings weren't just ignored. They were made out to be the problem. And this wasn't the first time she'd felt this way in the family dynamic. Over the years, there'd been small moments, subtle shifts in tone, backhanded compliments, awkward silences. But she had pushed them aside. She wanted to believe she was imagining things. She wanted to keep the peace. But now, here was this man, a stranger to her, treating her with open disregard. And instead of having her back, her mother-in-law immediately took his side. Not because she was there, not because she knew the whole story, but simply because he was Bob, and she wasn't. Walking to the car, she carried that weight. It wasn't just frustration. It was sadness, exhaustion, a kind of invisible wall that kept rising every time she tried to be seen. Really seen, in that family. And as much as she tried to brush it off, she couldn't ignore what her gut was telling her. This wasn't about a bad day or a grumpy realtor. It was about something deeper. She was a black woman, married into a white family, living in a predominantly white rural town in upstate New York. Every day, she felt the stares, the second glances, the feeling of being the different one. She'd grown used to it in public, but in private, within the family, that's where it cut the deepest. She hadn't accused anyone outright. She hadn't said the word, but it was there, in the room, in the silences, in the way people responded, or didn't respond, when she spoke. She didn't want to make assumptions, but at some point, when the same patterns keep showing up, you have to ask yourself, am I really imagining all this? Or is there something no one else wants to say out loud? That night, after the kids were asleep and the house had finally quieted down, she sat across from her husband and told him everything. Not just about Bob's behavior that afternoon, but how it made her feel. The way Bob had dismissed her. The way her mother-in-law had defended him without a second thought. The way she felt like a bystander in her own home-buying process. And deeper than that, the lingering feeling that this wasn't just about personalities. It was about something more uncomfortable. Her husband didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses or tell her she was overreacting. He just listened. And when she finished, he sat back for a second, visibly upset. Not at her, but at the situation. At Bob. At his mother. I noticed it too, he said quietly. The way Bob looked at you, or didn't look at you. The way he only talked to me, like you weren't even there. And just like that, she felt something she hadn't felt all day. Validation. They talked for hours, about the day, about the pattern, about the fact that this wasn't the first time his family had made her feel like she had to shrink herself to stay accepted. And for the first time in a while, she didn't feel like she was navigating this alone. The decision came easily. They weren't going to work with Bob anymore, period. Not just because of what happened, but because of how clearly he had shown who he was willing to respect and who he wasn't. But more importantly, her husband said something else, something she hadn't expected. I don't want my parents coming to any more showings, he said. This is our house, our future, and they're making it harder, not easier. She stared at him for a moment, not because she disagreed, but because she hadn't expected him to take such a clear stand. For so long, she'd felt like she had to tiptoe around his parents, afraid to rock the boat. And now, here he was, not just agreeing with her, but drawing a boundary she didn't even know she needed. Then came the second part, the part that stung even more. Her husband brought up something he had been quietly observing for a while, how his mother treated their children differently. Their biracial child, her biological child, often ignored, brushed past, or left out. Meanwhile, his white child from a previous relationship, her stepchild, was doted on, given extra attention, and constantly praised. He said he hadn't wanted to believe it. He thought maybe he was being paranoid. But after that day, after watching his mother defend a man who had clearly disrespected his wife, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He told her he planned to sit down with his parents, to talk openly, not just about Bob, but about everything. The favoritism, the subtle racism, the silence that had stretched too far for too long. She didn't know how that conversation would go, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something stronger than sadness. She felt seen. The conversation with his parents didn't go as smoothly as he'd hoped. He called them over for coffee the next afternoon, determined to keep things calm, honest, and respectful. She stayed upstairs with the kids, giving him space to speak freely, though every minute felt like an hour as she waited, wondering what was being said, how it was being received, and if they'd finally understand. It started with Bob. Her husband explained exactly what had happened. The eye roll, the cold shoulder, the clear difference in how Bob treated her versus everyone else. He said they would no longer be working with him and asked that his parents respect that decision. But instead of empathy, his mother's response was defensive. She didn't deny that Bob could be blunt, but insisted that he meant well, that he probably didn't realize how he came across. She said her daughter-in-law was too sensitive and maybe took things the wrong way. His father mostly stayed silent, not disagreeing, but not speaking up either. That silence said enough. Then came the harder part. The part he had rehearsed in his head all morning. He brought up the kids, how she'd noticed, and he had noticed, the difference in how their children were treated. How one was routinely greeted with warmth, affection, and interest, and the other barely got a hello. That changed the tone of the room. His mother's face went stiff. "I love all my grandchildren," she said flatly. "Don't start accusing me of something that serious." "I'm not accusing," he said carefully. "I'm telling you how it feels. And if that's how it feels to us, maybe it's time to look at why." That's when the conversation cracked. She got angry. Said she was hurt to be called out. Said she felt attacked in her own son's home. She turned the situation around. She was the victim now. And when she left, it wasn't with understanding or reflection. It was with a slammed door and the words, "I hope you're happy." He was quiet when he came upstairs, not defeated, but heavy. She could tell the conversation had taken a toll. He sat down beside her and said, "I did what I needed to do. I don't know if they'll change, but they know where I stand." And that was the beginning of something different in their home. For the first time, the unspoken was spoken. The discomfort wasn't swept under the rug. They didn't pretend, didn't play nice to keep the peace. It was raw and painful, yes, but it was real. They spent the rest of the evening with their kids. No phones, no distractions. They laughed, played a board game, made pancakes for dinner. And somewhere in the quiet moments, between the giggles and syrup spills, she realized the family they were building was rooted in truth, even if it meant letting go of what no longer fit. Weeks passed and the dust began to settle, not because everything was fixed, but because they were finally moving forward on their own terms. They found a new realtor, a young woman, warm and attentive, who spoke to both of them equally and made them feel respected from the first showing. The search for a house became something they could enjoy again. No more side glances, no more tension, just two people dreaming about their future and bringing their kids along for the ride. Her relationship with her in-laws stayed strained, but at least now the boundaries were clear. They weren't banned, but they were no longer in the center of every decision. The space that had once felt like a tightrope, trying to balance being polite, keeping the peace, and hiding the truth, had widened just enough for her to breathe. And her husband? He kept showing up, not just in words, but in actions. He noticed more, spoke up more, protected not just their family, but her, in ways she had needed for a long time, and maybe hadn't known how to ask for. One evening, while unpacking boxes in their newly rented temporary home, a cozy place while they waited to close on their new house, she looked around the room. Toys scattered, dinner on the stove, laughter echoing from the living room, and it hit her. They were building something that looked a lot like safety. Not perfection, not the picture of what everyone else thought a family should be, but something real. She didn't need her mother-in-law to approve of her. She didn't need to explain to a realtor why her questions deserved an answer, and she certainly didn't need to keep shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. She had her voice, and now she had proof that using it mattered. So, to anyone listening, maybe you've been there too, maybe not in the exact same way, but in that space where your presence feels like a problem, where someone makes you question your worth, where the silence is louder than the words. And if you have, you're not alone. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be respected. You deserve people around you who see you fully. And hey, if you're still with me, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a comment in the comments if you've ever had to set a hard boundary with family, or type real if you've ever had to walk away from someone, even if it was hard, just to protect your peace. And if this reminded you of someone in your life, tag them. You never know who needs to hear this. Because this isn't just one woman's story. This is what real life looks like. And around here, we tell it exactly as it is.